So, our next guest speaker has dedicated over 30 years of his life to serving the families and children of Louisiana, a veteran of the U.S. Army, former Deputy Judicial Administrator at the Louisiana Supreme Court's Division for Families and Children, and currently Deputy Secretary of the Louisiana Office of Juvenile Justice. Please welcome the Honorable Curtis Nelson.
He's sedated now.
All right, so I'm going to jump straight into this because we got a lot to cover. I know I'm right before your lunch, but just a little bit more with my background. I always knew I wanted to work with children and families, and so when I started undergrad, I was very intentional about what I wanted to do. I studied psychology, but even in my junior and senior year, I started focusing on adolescent psychology, abnormal psychology, because I knew I need something to prepare me. I'm a Loyola grad, and so, And so, of course, in law school, there's not a whole lot on juvenile, so I tried to find some seminars and courses that would, help me. I knew I wanted to go get in the courtroom because I like the aspects of trying cases, Perry Mason, I watched that so much. But I also knew at some point in my career I was going to do more policy work. So when I graduated from undergrad, I actually went and worked as a mental health technician. And I did that for about 2 years in group home settings as well as hospital settings. Again, just trying to prepare myself. And I started law school in '94. When I got out of law school, I hit the ground running, could not find a position in juvenile law-related matters. The East Baton Rouge Parish Public Defender's Office turned me down, and I went to another child-related agency, and because I had worked somewhere that the gentleman did not like, he said I would never hire you. Years later, he would call me and say, I have an opening, and I said, you can't afford me at this point. But I love trying cases. I love doing appellate work, and so I have a lot of cases published because I believe in precedents. I think when the law is not clear, it's the job of the trial lawyer to get some precedents. I finished my trial work with Hillamore and East Baton Rouge Parish as his juvenile section chief. Had the opportunity and the honor to work along with Will when he was an ADA, and did some really good things in Baton Rouge, and went to the Supreme Court to try to make that transition to the policy side. Thought I would probably be at the Supreme Court a little bit longer, but as you know, my agency has been on the news a lot, and I called my predecessor and said, if you need help, I'm ready to go because I can't stand by and watch this. And so started with OJJ in May of 2022. So that's a little bit about me. I consider myself a juvenile justice reform advocate. I've worn many hats, and despite what you may hear about me on the news, I believe in juvenile justice reform work. So my agency, OJJ, our responsibility is when an adolescent is adjudicated either delinquent or a child of a family in need of services, and for whatever reason, if the court, some crimes are mandatory where the youth has to come to OJJ, but many crimes, the youth does not have to come to OJJ. They can get their services in the community. But when the judge decides that the youth should be removed and placed in our custody, that's by court orders. And we have secure facilities and non-secure facilities. Our mission is to protect the public by providing safe and effective individualized services to youth. That's where our state is missing out. We got away from making it individualized. And the goal is to help the young people become more productive citizens. Our vision is OJJ is a quality system of care which embraces partnership with families, community stakeholders to assist youth in redirecting their lives towards responsible citizenship. In 2002, right before the pandemic, I made a phone call to the governor's office, and I told his staff what we're missing at this point is the quality system of care. Our agency had become too correctional, and correctional and juvenile justice, it really doesn't mesh. So as we get into our conversation, I think it's important to know a little bit about the history of our state when it comes to juvenile justice. So I love the expression, those that fail to learn from their history are doomed to repeat it. Where we are right now in the state with juvenile justice, we didn't learn from our past. And so under my leadership, we're going to get back on the right track. So historically, what we know is that there was a time in this country where children and adults, if a child committed a crime, you just treat the child like an adult. And so it was not uncommon for a child to be in a penitentiary institution with adults, especially for black children. Not uncommon. In our state, in the early 1900s, we had the Louisiana State Reform School for Boys in Monroe. It was a white-only reform school. That name was changed to the Louisiana Training Institute for Boys, and that is the Swanson Monroe campus. And if you go to Swanson Monroe, we still have the name Louisiana Training Institute for Boys. 1926, the State Industrial School for Girls opened in Ball. 5, LTI was renamed the Lewis Jetson Correctional Center for Youth, and in 2007, corrections was dropped, and so it's called the Jetson Correctional Center. Jetson is actually, we no longer house juveniles there. The women inmates are housed on that campus. I can remember growing up, because I'm from Baton Rouge, and I can remember growing up, we would drive past that facility, and one day I just asked my dad, I said, what is that place? And he said, that's where, you know, the bad kids go. Because for me as a teenager, because I was born in 1969, I didn't have a concept that an adolescent could get arrested and go to jail. That's not to say I didn't have bad people in my neighborhood. And I grew up in a, well, when we moved into my neighborhood, it was probably only 3 or 4 black families. It soon became a majority black neighborhood. And of course, there were kids that did stuff, and I'm not an angel, but I never had a concept that you could get arrested and be booked in a facility, even though Jetson was right down the street from my neighborhood in some ways. 1972, Louisiana Training Institute, Bridge City, that was open. That's, Bridge City's been on the news a lot. That's probably why I'm here, because of Bridge City. But Bridge City was actually it was run by nuns for wayward girls. And so the state acquired that property, and it had girls at one point, but then we brought the boys. Currently, Bridge City is where we do our sex offender treatment, and that's probably, it's going to stay that way for a while until we can work on our image within the state. So, you remember from law school that case, Enroy Galt. This is the case that really put a lot of momentum as far as changing our juvenile justice system. Due process rights, same rights that adults have, that should be recognized in the juvenile justice system. Although juvenile hearings are not as formal as adult criminal cases, the Constitution doesn't go away. And I can tell you, when I travel the state and sit in certain courts, I get really troubled. And I'm looking at the defense lawyer like, I don't know, I am still a lawyer, and I have an obligation to report when I see ineffective, well, it goes beyond ineffective legal counsel. I'll just be honest. It's just, if a case is going on and the defense lawyer is on his cell phone, yeah, that's not good representation. Also, I'm not going to give my prosecutors a break, because prosecutor, you know that our role on the juvenile justice side, yeah, you get an adjudication, but then that's when the hard work starts, because you got to now start the rehabilitative process. 1974, Congress passed the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act, and that governs the juvenile justice system nationwide. This act requires separation of juvenile offenders from adult offenders. We got a case pending in federal court because the allegations is that we are in violation of this act. And I'm not going to talk because the case is pending, but I think we are in compliance with the law. But more importantly, this act deinstitutionalized status offenders. So if you have a youth who has committed an offense only because of their age, so truancy, ungovernable, those youth should not be institutionalized. 1980, 1990s, that was my period. As a teenager, you know, the pendulum swung in our nation. That was when the term super juvenile predators started coming on the scene, because there was a perception that there was a exorbitant high number of violent juvenile crime. Now, there was violent juvenile crime, but I would challenge you to look at the statistics, because I think that juvenile crime was comparable to the adult crime, which is what's happening now. Everyone's screaming saying the juveniles are out of control. No, crime is up, so the juveniles are just kind of following what's happening with the adults. And so even now, there's some discussion, well, this is just as worse as it was in the 90s. Not really. I mean, there are instances of juvenile violent crimes, but I challenge anyone to show that we are somehow outpaced what was happening in the 90s. But after the 90s, that really started the conversation that we got to get tougher on juveniles. So, kind of just bringing it back to Louisiana, one of my predecessors in 1991, Assistant Secretary Don Wagner, published, it's called The Timeline for Change. And it was a very comprehensive report that focused on youth and families. And he used this report to challenge the OJJ staff, you should be agents for change. He recognized that there are challenges in balancing public safety, punishment, rehabilitation, education, working with adolescents. This is challenging work, and it's not for everyone. But I will tell you this, under our state law, under our Constitution, we don't punish. We do rehabilitative services for our adolescents. But Louisiana got a lot of attention because in the 90s, we actually had one of the highest incarceration rates for juveniles in the nation. We were averaging right around 3,000 to 4,000 juveniles incarcerated annually. And so, because there were so many eyes on our state, there were many public hearings. You've heard from one of my good counterparts on the advocate side, Rachel Gasser. You'll hear from Gina Womack, I think tomorrow. Gina Womack, she's one of my heroes. Now we fight tooth and nail because she says some things about me, and I say, Gina, we need to go have a drink because you know I'm not that guy. And we will go have drinks. But I respect Gina because what I tell people, we need warriors to keep the system honest. And that's what Gina and so many others in the 90s, they went and they fought to get changes in our state. Another one of my heroes, Justice Kitty Kimball, she was right there on the front end to say, Louisiana, we can do better. Mitch Landrieu, he was lieutenant governor at the time, and again, another hero of mine, never met him, would love to meet him, but Don Craven Sr. These individuals came together and said, Louisiana could do better. And what they did was they got a group of other state leaders and they went to the state of Missouri. At that time, Missouri was doing some very innovative things when it came to juvenile justice. Mark Stewart had come up with a concept on how to program youth. And Louisiana, we went to Missouri to learn from them. Now, the problem is, because our state at time, we can be cheap, we went to Missouri, came back with the concept, but we only implemented half of the concept. What we didn't bring back was, yes, we are here to rehabilitate, but there are times where you have a certain population of youth that you can't put those youth in an open barrack setting, because if you don't give them immediately what they need, that behavior doesn't go away, and they're going to act out. And so what we didn't bring back from Missouri was you do need an individualized room setting where you can take those youth who aren't ready yet to be in an open barrack setting. That was one of the big pieces that we didn't bring back. The other big piece we didn't bring back is you got to have services in the community. So we came back from Missouri. We created something that we call the Louisiana model, because we call it Lamont. So we came back with some of the programming, and we renamed it, called it Lamont. We did some community-based services, but we didn't do everything. And that is kind of how things just continue to snowball for our state. So because Louisiana, we still were not doing the things we needed to do for our children, we got sued by the federal government. And so as a result of that lawsuit, Louisiana, we entered into a consent decree, a settlement agreement, and that agreement pretty much resulted in the Office of Youth Development being kind of separated from the Department of Public Safety and Correction. My boss, who was just here, Secretary LeBlanc, at one time, OJJ was just collapsed into the Department of Public Safety and Correction. As a result of the federal lawsuit, we had to separate ourselves, and OJJ was designated with its own deputy secretary, and the concept was corrections, that's adult, but Office of Juvenile Justice, you are rehabilitative. And so we're going to put dollars, and we're going to force you to change your structure in how you rehabilitate adolescents. Another really big piece of legislation in our state was Act 1225. And this really laid the foundation. There was a task force put together. That task force came up with so many wonderful recommendations. And then the Juvenile Justice Implementation Commission was created to implement the reform. One of the things that I think we do too much in our state is we create task force, commissions, and boards. Boards you gotta have. But we do a lot of commissions, we do a lot of task forces. The problem with the Juvenile Justice Implementation Commission is that once you had certain legislatures roll off and finish their time, or people retired, the passion, the energy went away. And that commission stayed dormant for years. And again, when she comes and speaks to you and she says all kind of horrible things about me, I need you to say, but he said good things about you. Again, my good friend Gina Womack, she galvanized and got that commission back up and running. Royce Duplessis, now Senator Duplessis, Royce and Gina, they got that commission back up and running. I was at the Supreme Court. I said, we will do our part to get it back up and running. So thankfully, the commission is up and running, but it lay dormant probably for about 6 or 7 years. So that's a little of the history. I told you about Lamont, and Lamont is something I believe in. I think it can work. I think what has to happen for OJJ is we have to have fidelity to Lamont. We have to do Lamont correctly. So Lamont is the catalyst that drives the therapeutic processes. It gives the kids structure within the facilities, and it's a tool that the staff can use to build trust and to really help the young people as they work on themselves. Because every child that's in our facility is different. I could have 2 kids that committed armed robbery. One kid is from a prominent family, the other kid is from probably the poorest part of the state. Our children are different. So with Lamont, there are 4 stages: the orientation, learning, and safety. So when a child first comes on the campus, like, we have to orientate them to, this is what's going to happen, here's the expectations, and here's your end goal. Then we have the emerging phase, the self-awareness. So you've gotten through the trauma of being introduced into a new environment. You don't have your family, you don't have your friends, you don't know these other kids. This kid might be from a rival gang. Once you get past that orientation period, now we need you to start working on yourself. And after you kind of do the emerging phase, it's called adaptation, because we've given you some skills, but now you need to start applying those skills. So what am I talking about? Well, just because I say something to you that you don't like, you don't have to curse me out. Let's work on those skills. If you don't like what I said, let's do a timeout. Let me give you some coping techniques to help you redirect your own, what's ever going on with you. And then the last phase is transformation. This is the phase where the youth, they've gotten it, But now we need them to be role models for the other children. And we want them to start working on their leadership skills. And it is at that transformation phase where really, once they finish that phase, those young people should be leaving our facilities. But that's not what's happening. And we're going to talk about that. The current state of the Louisiana juvenile justice system. I can't get past the news. I can't get past the radio. I can't even get past my wife. She called me on Tuesday and said, "Do you know y'all are in the paper again?" I said, "It's a mistake." So some children escaped from a group home, and they were in OJJ's custody. And at Bridge City, that is where we enter all the warrants for any child that runs away or goes on escape from any facility. And so the newspaper article was, "Bridge City escapee caught." It's like, nobody escaped from Bridge City, honey. That's just, you know, the story. But we have been in the news, and I'm not running from this, because this is Louisiana, and I know we can do better. So we are at Angola. We have had juveniles to escape from our facilities. We are at maximum capacity, and here's the other thing. It's not just OJJ, the local detention sites. I know I have judges here who have detention facilities in their parishes, their jurisdiction, and they too are in full capacity. At one point, we were having to send kids out of state, and then we got a report about educational deficiencies within our facilities. This is the current state of our Louisiana juvenile justice system, along with the fact that probably at least once every 2 weeks, you're going to hear a story about an adult child being shot, a child being murdered, a child being arrested for shooting someone, a child being arrested for armed robbery. Our state has a problem. I'm not going to say it's a crisis, but we have a problem, and we need to be honest that this is not how young people should live their lives. So, although it could sound really bad, we've made improvements. So, there was a time, like I said, 3,000 adolescents in any given day was in a secure facility. Our numbers are down to 352. That's what we average now. But don't forget, I have secure facilities and I have non-secure facilities. So I have about 342 youth who are in non-secure facilities, group homes. The state doesn't own those group homes. We contract with local providers to place children who score low enough so that they're not really a risk to be in the community, but they probably can't be at home. There are many reasons why a young person may not be able to stay at home. But the vast majority of the young people that OJJ is working with, they're on supervision. I will be honest, I think if we can't get control of what's happening, we are going to need another secure facility, and I'll talk about that. But I would love to see more group homes. I would love to see more providers who are willing to work with young people in the community setting when there's a situation for whatever reason, there's not proper supervision at home, maybe there's something happening in the community where they can't safely stay in that community. I would love to see more group homes in our state, and that's an easy fix. We just need more people to invest dollars, to buy a building, to buy an old home, and be willing to try to get staff and run a group home for our young people who need us. So let's talk about my secure care facilities. Bridge City. The notorious Bridge City, as some reporters like to say. It's not notorious, it's a very, very beautiful campus. Right now, in our state, I can't keep up with the demand. And because I can't keep up with the demand, I'm probably going to have to build another facility. Because as quick as I'm releasing children, I have kids being arrested, kids being prosecuted, kids being ordered into state's custody. So our admission rate is pretty high. But I also have a very significant length of stay. I'm going to talk about that a little bit further down. So what we're trying to do right now as an agency to keep up with the demand is I am telling my staff, let's do everything we can. So there are some kids I can step down from a secure facility to a group home. However, like everyone else and like your courts, the pandemic did a really big hit on our capacity because the group homes are now trying to get back online with being properly staffed. They were able to get away with low rate of pay, but now that Walmart is paying $15, $16, $15, $16 an hour, they are having to readjust their budgets so that they can pay people a living wage. But if I don't have enough group homes and I only have so many secure beds, then it just makes us, we really have to stay on top of processing the kids so that we can make sure we always have bed availability. The letter that went out to the judges, and I told my predecessor this, I think that letter could have been worded a little bit better because the media picked up on that and said, OJJ is not accepting any children. No, that's not the case. I mean, the law says I have to accept children. So that was fake news. But what you will see is that, and this is just a snapshot for a few months, we're staying pretty consistent with the children who are either being placed in our custody or the children who are placed under our supervision. I would rather the top number because that means young people are in the community, but those numbers aren't decreasing, which means we need to do something different when it comes to helping children to avoid being arrested and avoid being convicted. The average length of stay. This is the thing that keeps me up at night. So the average length of stay for a youth that's placed in our custody, whether secure or non-secure, is right about 18 months. And that number kind of goes up and down. And right now I'm thinking for the next quarter it's really going to go down because I've had my legal team cranking out motions to examine the children who can safely be returned home and getting them back into the community. But it's right at about 18 months. Who are the youth that are in my custody? Overwhelmingly, it's African American males. And again, I'm the black kid that grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood that didn't even know that people got arrested and went away to jail. Well, the story in our state is overwhelmingly African American males make up my population. So you see the numbers, they speak for themselves. Girls, fortunately, we don't have a high number of girls. The behavior's a little bit different. I know Judge Casey Jones, she runs a human trafficking court. I get nervous about the girls because there are different things that is putting them at risk. And we as a state need to be able to make sure we can safely have our girls go somewhere. But right now, the majority of the girls, if they have to be removed from their communities, we place them at the Ware facility in Coshada. But I want to go back to that. Let me go back. So those are my numbers. We're right at about 300. This is what we all should look at. So you would think, oh my goodness, murders, crimes, rape, all the kids that are in OJJ's custody must be like the highest level risk offenders. They're not. For fiscal year 2022, I had 328 youth who came through our secure facilities, and out of those youth, those are the numbers. No, I don't like the fact that 29 adolescents murdered somebody, but that's better than 328 adolescents murdering somebody. We definitely see the rape cases, but as a former juvenile prosecutor and judges who preside over these cases, I know a lot of those cases are inappropriate behavior between the offender and a family member. And as a prosecutor, I had to teach myself to not automatically think that this adolescent who was charged with first-degree rape is a pedophile. Like I went away and did some studying to really get a better understanding of should I worry about this youth? Or what do I need to give that youth? And what the research and science says is that for most of those kids, they made a bad decision, teach them appropriate behavior, and they will never offend. It's only a small percentage who are possibly future pedophiles. Armed robberies, simple robberies, I threw in carjacking just to kind of put the number up. But the real story is I have 253 kids in 2022 who were placed in my custody that weren't in my custody for a violent crime. So when you go back and you look at that average length of stay, and I have a youth staying in my custody for 18 months, we need to think about, but sure, maybe the murderer, maybe the rapist, we got to be concerned about it. But what about the nonviolent offenses? Why can't that child go home? I know you had someone speak to you, I think yesterday, about raised age, and I'm not going to get into all of it, but I will tell you this. Raised age is not my problem. Okay? It did not overwhelm my system. I believe in data. I think we should make decisions off of data. I support raise the age. I don't want to see us go back to treating 17-year-olds as adults, because at 17, you're in high school. You're not mature. You made a stupid mistake. You probably will only make that mistake once. So I'm not in favor of treating 17-year-olds as adults. And this is where the sheriffs and law enforcement, they get mad at me, because I tell them the numbers don't support what you say. Raise the age always put out that most of these 17-year-olds who commit crimes, they're going to probably get probation. And that's what my numbers show. Yes, I have more probation cases now, so they're mostly on supervision. But when it comes to being in a non-secure setting, a secure setting, the numbers are low. So the blue graph, that was the projection. The orange graph is when we phased in raised age, we started with nonviolent offenses. So that represents nonviolent offenses. The kind of grayish line, that's where we're in full implementation. And then, of course, the yellow line is this last fiscal year. And so the good news is the majority of the 17-year-olds, when they are adjudicated, found guilty, we're placing them on supervision. Only a very small number have to come into state's custody. And the really good news is on the secure care side, the number definitely fell below what was projected. So here's just a map to show you where we are with facilities. And so, of course, we have the facility up at in Monroe. And so Monroe was the facility that unfortunately sustained a lot of destruction and damage during the pandemic. And that's why our bed space capacity was reduced, because some of the dorms were destroyed in a way that you can't safely house a youth in those dorms. But we're building a new facility, a more secure facility. So you remember I told you we came back from Missouri. We will have a high security facility where adolescents can have their own separate rooms. And as we work with them to de-escalate them, then we can take them and put them on another campus where they can be in an open barrack setting. Columbia, that's our fast track program, so the average length of time at that campus is 6 to 7 months. Acadiana Bunkie in central Louisiana, we really want to make that a low to moderate level facility where we could work on vocational skills for the youth, college preparatory courses for those youth. We have a facility open in St. Martinville, and we will probably keep that facility open until I can get the new Swanson open. Bridge City is a jump program, so that's the sex offender program. And I believe that facility will stay a sex offender program for a good period of time. And then we opened up the facility at Angola. We call it the West Feliciana Center for Youth. Now, what is Angola? Why did you have to go there? Again, I have a federal lawsuit pending, so I'm going to be careful what I say. But we needed a space where we could take a youth who is either engaging in very aggressive physical attacks on staff or their peers, so I'm talking broken bones, that kind of stuff, or I have a youth who is destroying property in a manner that makes it unsafe for the other youth and possibly is a way of trying to escape. Or the last basis would be for a youth who is trying to escape. The facility on the grounds of Angola, it gives me that ability to have that youth placed in a setting, but it's a temporary transitional unit. In fact, we call it the transitional treatment unit. And it is a 6 to 8 week program. Once we can de-escalate the youth behavior, then they go back to a regular campus. And so West Feliciana, Angola, that's not where we're just sending all the bad kids, because all of my kids have problems. It is a facility where I have to put this young person in a setting where they're not going to hurt others, themselves, or my staff, and we can just focus on what is going on with you. How can I get you to a point where you can be safely returned back to one of the other campuses? So we always have youth who are being cycled through that facility. So, because of the demand, I have to build a new facility. We have not determined where we're going to build that facility, but it's going to be a 72-bed facility. I have the funding within my capital outlay budget, and so I have, based upon the demand in the detention centers, the demand for youth automatically placed directly in our custody based upon the trend over the last 5 years, we need a new facility. And we're going to use this as an opportunity to bring back something that was taken away when they closed down Jetson. Every youth has to be assessed and processed so we can really understand what are your needs. When we closed down Jetson, we took away, it's called a Juvenile Justice Reception Center. Well, with this new facility, I'm going to bring back online a juvenile reception center, so I can do really good assessments of the adolescents before I send them to one of the other facilities. We have not determined where we're going to build this, but we do know this. I think I want to go with the model of having single rooms as opposed to the open barracks, because I already have open barracks, but I want to use those open barracks for low risk and moderate level youth. So this is just, we already have our architect coming up with the designs. I think we're pretty close to finishing up on those designs. And so this is just a picture of what the building will look like. Again, it will be very secure. And what we realize is, especially on the receiving end, it's probably good to have individual rec areas so that pods, groups, so the average pod is 12 to 16 kids. I want to be able to let those kids who have formed a bond to be able to go out into a rec yard and just interact and do what they need to do without having to worry about the other pod. Because unfortunately, that's what we see. I'll have one dorm fighting against the other dorm. And it's like, what? Redbud is going up against Bulldog dorm. But aren't y'all all from New Orleans? Yeah, but he's from that side of New Orleans, and he's from that side of New Orleans. So, you know, sometimes that behavior, it replicates itself when the child is placed in our custody. But that's a survival skill, if we want to be honest. So here's my point. We cannot build our way out of this crisis. We have to come, and even though I'm going to build another facility, I would rather take, I think it's going to cost me maybe about $75 million to build a new facility. I would rather put that money in the community. So this is what I'm going to kind of end off on. I think it's important in this work to remember we are talking about adolescents. And I think we should use research when we're talking about how do you deal with an adolescent. I remember when I was 15 and 16, I was very reckless. I did some very risk-taking things, and I eventually matured and grew out of it. So what the research shows is that at a very young age, anybody that has children, you know, you're kind of nervous, you don't want to take risks. But as you get into your adolescence, you become more prone to engage in risky behavior. So you take risky behavior, impulsive behavior, and you mix that with peers, and that's how you get groups of teenagers engaging in a crime. But the good news is, by the age of 21, we know that that adolescence risk perception starts to go back up. So the older you get, then you become a little bit more nervous. I was in the military. I used to rappel. I would get on the chopper and rappel down, didn't think anything about it. You put me on a building now and say, look over. Oh my goodness. And my wife is like, you used to jump out of helicopters. What's going on? I don't know. Also, we know impulsivity, that at a young age, you're very impulsive, but then the older you get, that impulsivity starts to decline. So it's really important that we understand when you have an adolescent, don't treat them like an adult. And I will tell you this, every one of the youth who have engaged in escapes over the last 2 years, I've sat down and talked to every last one of them. And what they tell me is, you know what, the reason why I started acting out, I have been in your custody for 3 years. I'm tired, I'm done. I don't want to talk about Lamont. I don't want to talk about act right. You know, when I went to court after the first 9 months, I said, okay, the judge says I need to do a little bit more. The DA says do a little bit more. I came back to the facility and I did a little bit more. But at 18 months, I just said, I don't give a damn anymore. And at 18 months, Mr. Nelson, this is what you get. Because I don't believe you. You people keep telling me I'm going to go home, and if I act right, I can go home. I'm never going home. So I just kind of figured I might as well join in with the rest of the chaos and just be a problem maker. We know that we have children who are vulnerable. We know our ranking in the state. So all of this impacts our children. So our educational ranking, our healthcare ranking, our family and community ranking, these realities, they fall upon our children. We know about economic well-being. So 28% of children in Louisiana live in poverty. The national average is 22. 34% of children in Louisiana have parents who lack secure employment. National average is 30. 11% of Louisiana teens are not in school or not working. National average is 7. I mean, if we don't address this, then you're always going to have juvenile crime. Again, just some more statistics that shows that we have to do things. If you really want to stop the juvenile crime, then you have to address the things that are happening socially within our community. And OJJ, we are going to get on the front end of stopping children from committing crimes. So, how do we bring real systemic change in our system? It's a lot there, but all I want you to know is that our Louisiana's Children Code, it sets out the roadmap. As a state, we respect the importance of family. We know that families are essential to having a free society. Parents should have the right to raise their child as they see fit, but you also have a responsibility as a parent to give that child love, affection, and meet their basic needs. The children, the parents who come in our court when they're in this system where they can't succeed, we owe them respect. Children owe their parents respect. They should be obedient. But the role of the state should be very limited. And we should only assert the power of the state when it is absolutely necessary. And my favorite line of all of this is that when we have to intervene, it should only be for extraordinary reasons. But even when you intervene, you should respect the parents and the child, because that's the institution of the family. I cringe, and I'm not calling out any judge's name, but I cringe when I'm in a courtroom and I see a judge who does not give that mother the respect she deserves, does not give that child the respect they deserve. Because I think, but what if that were me? I have an education, I have understanding, but I could clearly see this mother is limited and she's trying to do the best she can do, but everybody in the system is talking down to the mother, everybody in the system is talking down to the child. Another provision in our children's code is that if we can, preferably the rehabilitation should happen in the home. And if we remove the child from the home, we should try to do it in the manner that's mostly closely aligned to what that child would experience in their home. I am a bad parent. You know why I'm a bad parent? Because I have other people trying to raise other people's children. And so when you send that child with their issues, I'm going to do the best I can to train my staff on how to properly rehabilitate a youth. But at the end of the day, that's not that staff member's child. So if we have to place a child in state custody, we should try to eliminate all the unnecessary delays that can prevent that child from being returned back home. And that's why I want to talk to you about Article 898 of the Children's Code. Now, in East Baton Rouge Parish, we did not have this problem because my boss, District Attorney Hilla Moore, when he hired me, he told me, we need a system that's not going to feed more black males into the adult system. And I told him, I know what you need to do, boss. I've been studying for this all my life, so I know what to do. And we created a process where we constantly checked on those children that had to be removed. And when it was time for them to be stepped down, the prosecutor would make the motion. We didn't wait on the defense lawyer. We would say, Your Honor, at this time, we're going to either dismiss we will ask that the case be closed, or we ask that you put this youth on parole. That's what we did in EBR, but it wasn't happening across the state. So the law was changed to say that for a nonviolent offense, the maximum amount of time the child shall stay in OJJ's custody shall not exceed 9 months. And if you have to exceed 9 months, the burden is on the state to show that by clear and convincing evidence, the child's treatment cannot be received in a less restrictive setting, i.e. back home. I have a judge right now who is refusing to let a youth go home who has. The only thing he has to do is get his GED. And the judge said, I want you to go back and get your GED. And I told my staff, you take that judge up on risk, because he can get a GED in the community. He's done everything he's supposed to do. We're going to put him back in custody because he did not complete his GED? That's not what the law says. So, as I conclude, what I would say is we got to go a little bit further upstream. So often my agency, we get tagged with, you guys are the bad guys. And it's like, okay, I didn't arrest the child, I didn't prosecute the child, I did not commit the child. I am doing what the law says I have to do. So if you want to stop the children from getting to me, you got to get them before they go before the judge. You got to get them before the DA gets the complaint on his desk. There are things we can do upstream to stop children from coming into the system. So one thing, OJJ, we're working on, and we're looking to be able to pilot, we're going to try to do this across the state. But right now, we've targeted the Lafayette juvenile justice system because they have a disproportionate high number of youth who are being adjudicated and committed to OJJ's custody. And we're working with Judge Michelle Bro. No, there is no ill feelings here. Judge Bro has welcomed us into our community. So what we're going to do in Lafayette, we're going to develop a multi-agency reception center. So when the child commits that first misdemeanor crime, we want to be able to start putting services in the home, having assessments done so that we can redirect that child, redirect the parent. Now, there's a facility in Calcasieu called the Mark Center. EVR kind of has something. I know Iberia has a Mark Center. We want to get the research to show the legislature that if you do true community-based early intervention work, you could really reduce your juvenile delinquent numbers. Lafayette actually had a Mark, but they closed it down. And that was another reason why we said, well, we know that when they had it, their numbers were low, but now their numbers have peaked. So the game plan is we're going to do this pilot program in Lafayette, get the data, but then we're going to go back to the legislature and say we want to do this all across the state. OJJ, we are the recipient of a $1 million OJJDP grant, and that grant is to help us figure out how can we be a better system. And so we're working with OJJDP, the Council of Juvenile Justice Administrators, research group, and we're just doing a complete assessment and reevaluation of our processes to make sure we're doing the best we can do as a state agency. I know that Secretary LeBlanc talked to you about the JJR, the JRI funds, OJJ, we do get funds. Right now, it's right at $5 million. What I will tell you is it's like hell trying to hold on to that $5 million because there are legislatures sometimes who see money, and we had to fight this last session because the legislature said they don't need that money. They have secure facilities, they have group homes. We could give this money to somebody else. And we had to go and fight because we said, no, what we're trying to do is to keep them from coming to us. So we do get funding for juvenile diversion programs. We get funding for alternatives to juvenile detention programs. And so my ask is I want more money because this is money I can pump throughout the state of Louisiana and work with local jurisdictions to build systems within their community whereby when that child starts to go wayward, that we can get some help to the child. The last thing I'll just talk about is that in conjunction with the money we get, so the legislature passed Act 147 requiring that any youth who is arrested and a determination is made that the child should be booked in detention, that child has to be screened. And this legislation was the result of an adolescent, I think his name was Solon Peterson, and Solon may have been 13, 14, but Solon went in the bathroom and set something on fire in the bathroom, and then that's a problem. He was arrested, placed in detention, and while in detention, he committed suicide. So what the conversation was, well, did anybody do an assessment? Because maybe if you did an assessment, you probably could have picked up that maybe he was suicidal, or maybe you would have picked up something else. So under our state law, every child has to be screened. And really the only basis for holding a youth in detention is, one, you have a concern that they may reoffend before the next court date, or you have a concern that they may not appear for their next court date. Those should really be the only two bases for detaining a child in detention, and that's what Act 147 discusses. Act 147 also gave the courts authority to either seek funding from OJJ, and so we do grants, and so applicants apply for our JRI funding. Also, courts have the ability to go out and raise their own funds or contract with someone to do an alternative to placing that youth in detention. So in conclusion, and I know it's a lot, I'm very passionate about this work. I have optimism. I think we can get out of where we are, but in order to do it, it's going to take everybody rolling up their sleeves and doing what we need to do to help our children. Our children deserve the constitutional due processes that is embedded in the juvenile justice proceeding. Just because most of the hearings are confidential doesn't mean the Constitution goes away. And that's what I think happens. Nobody, the public's not in, the doors are closed, and I just feel sometimes we forget that, yeah, it's informal, but the rights don't go away. I stay on my fellow prosecutors, and they get mad at me sometimes, but they need to understand the difference between juvenile justice and adult criminal justice. When I would hire a young prosecutor, because usually they're straight out of law school, I would tell them, if you want to be a juvenile prosecutor and work for me, you have to be part prosecutor, you have to be part big buddy, you have to be part counselor, you have to be part mental health counselor. I said, you have to understand that once you get the adjudication, then that's when the real work starts. Because now the goal is, what do we do to make sure when this child comes home, they're going to be a more productive citizen? I think judges need to understand that juvenile justice is not punishment. So making a youth go back in my custody because you want them to get their GED, I get it. In our mind, we think, but that's going to make them a more productive citizen. But for that adolescent, what they're saying is there is no hope. And so I hope this young man will continue to work the program. So that is what I have for you. I would be